Ariel might have wanted to be a part of Eric's world, but that may have changed if she knew the truth behind the story that The Little Mermaid was based on. Like most Disney classics, The Little Mermaid drew a lot of inspiration from an old fairy tale that had much darker undertones than the version that they brought to the big screen. And in Hans Christian Andersen's book that shared its name with the Disney film, the real Little Mermaid learned the hard way that love wasn't all that it's cracked up to be. Much like the Disney movie, the original version of The Little Mermaid was obsessed with humans, only in this case it was on a more spiritual level. In both versions of the story, the titular character is put in a situation where they decided to save a human prince from drowning. And much like Ariel did, Hans' version of the mermaid fell in love with the human. Only in this case, she didn't really have to hide her fascination. According to the novel, the kingdom that the mermaid lived in didn't forbid talking about the surface, but instead just restricted who was allowed to travel there. Any mermaid over the age of 15 was permitted to travel to the surface at their own risk, and because of that, the kingdom's knowledge of humans was pretty vast. So when the Little Mermaid asked her grandmother if humans died as mermaids do, they actually had an answer for her. In this case, the book explained that when a mermaid died, it simply dissolved into sea foam and ceased to exist entirely. However, according to the Little Mermaid's grandmother, when a human died, their soul was immortal and would pass on to a higher plane of existence. And that fascinated the mermaid, who had fallen in love with the prince that she saved. Interestingly enough, the mermaid's grandmother also told her that mermaids could earn a soul and not turn into sea foam. All they had to do was get a human to fall in love with them. According to the book, the human had to love the mermaid more than his own family, and then the mermaid would be given a soul of their own. That's certainly a strange mixture of morbid and hauntingly beautiful all at the same time. But if one thing is clear, it's that The Little Mermaid by Hans Christian Andersen was far deeper than Disney's retelling of the tale. Now, in both versions of the story, the Little Mermaid sought help from a sea witch, which turned into a sour situation. However, it's clear the one depiction of the character got a far more tragic deal. Much like Ariel in the Disney version of the story, this Little Mermaid wanted to make the prince fall in love with her. Only in Hans's book, she had more than one motive. While the Little Mermaid did love the prince and wanted him to fall in love back, she also wanted him to love her so that she wouldn't turn into sea foam, as she was told by her grandmother, which adds higher stakes to the mermaid and the prince's relationship. And in order to ensure that she could make that happen, much like in the animated movie, the original Little Mermaid asked a sea witch for help. Now, this is where there's a bit of a difference between Disney's Little Mermaid and the original novel that the movie was based on, with the book having a much darker spin on the spell. In both cases, the sea witch seemed to be willing to offer her help at a cost, the price of which is the mermaid's beautiful voice. In Ariel's case, though, Ursula used her magical shell to take the essence of Ariel's voice, and in return, she was gracefully transformed into a human and forced to swim to the surface in order to breathe. Not only does Hans Christian Andersen's version of the story bring a darker meaning to the terms of the arrangement, but the Little Mermaid's transformation into a human is also much more gruesome. You see, for this Little Mermaid, giving up her voice meant that the sea witch was literally going to cut out her tongue, and that's not even the worst part of the spell. Yet the titular character still agreed, which proved just how much she wanted love from a human. According to the story, if the mermaid accepted the potion that the sea witch offered her, the process of turning into a human would be very painful. The transition of a mermaid tail turning into human legs would be less like a Sailor Moon transformation and described more like her tail being sliced down the middle by a blade. And on top of that, the mermaid also learned that if she drank the potion, every step that she took would feel as if she was walking on a floor made out of knives. Those two added rules to the contract alone prove that the original story of The Little Mermaid is truly horrifying when compared to the Disney classic. And that wasn't even the final rule that the Little Mermaid would have to follow if she drank the potion. According to the sea witch, if she drank the potion and transformed into a human, but the man she loved was to marry someone else, the mermaid would die instantly on the morning after his wedding and turn into sea foam. This is when the original Little Mermaid had to weigh her options a bit more than Ariel did. Ariel's stakes weren't quite as high as the character that she was based on, so you might think that it would be a no-brainer for the original Little Mermaid to turn down the potion. But you have to remember that Hans's version of the character also had more that she wanted out of love than Ariel did. While Ariel wanted to find true love and happiness in the Disney movie, the character that she was based on wanted to find love, happiness, and on top of all that, an immortal soul so that she wouldn't turn into sea foam when she died. And with that, according to the book, her choice was made up and she drank the potion without a second thought about what it was costing her. Sadly, Hans Christian Andersen's Little Mermaid would learn that all of her sacrifices may have been for nothing, as overall, her story was not a happy one. The mermaid may have successfully transformed into a human, but she would soon learn that the loss of her voice turned her gift of humanity into a curse. According to the book, after drinking the potion, the Little Mermaid washed up on the beach, which was where the prince found her the next morning. Much like in the Disney film, the prince found the mermaid, who was now a human, to be one of the most beautiful people he'd ever seen. Only in this case, that sadly wouldn't lead privy to the love that the titular character expected. Much like the movie, Hans' novel explained that the mermaid was taken in by the prince. He began to take care of her in the book, and because she was unable to speak, the prince wasn't really able to communicate with her. Sadly, that caused a rift in their relationship, and instead of developing feelings of love for the mute woman, the prince started to care for her as if she was a family member. It was purely platonic. Now, this is vastly different from what happened in Disney's version of the story, where Ariel had to compete with Ursula for the prince's affection. And much like most fairy tale stories, it's clear that the original was intended to be a bit more heart-wrenching than Disney's retelling. Now, the novel continues by telling of times when the prince took the mermaid on trips and adventures with him. And as she went horseback riding with the prince, the mermaid couldn't help but continue to fall deeply in love with him, though those were feelings that wouldn't be reciprocated. As the story goes on, it turned out that the prince had already begun to have feelings for another person, which started just a little while before the Little Mermaid got her legs. Apparently, when she saved him at the beginning of the story, the place that she dropped him off at was actually the shore of a religious temple or monastery, which was where he met a woman who he fell madly in love with. And if you remember, the prince marrying another woman meant certain death for the Little Mermaid, something that she could do almost nothing about. So if you thought Ariel had it rough in the Disney version of the story, you have to admit that it was nothing compared to the pain and heartache that the original Little Mermaid faced. The book continues, and the prince ended up getting married to the woman that found him after the mermaid saved him, and the couple, along with some close friends including the mermaid, decided to take their ship out for a celebration. During this time, the Little Mermaid knew that she was destined for death the next morning, and as Hans described her looking out to the sea, pondering the choices she had made, the Little Mermaid was surprised to see her mermaid siblings swimming up to the boat with a way out of the witch's spell. And though it would be an easy out, the original book, The Little Mermaid, was a heartbreaking story that didn't end with a happily ever after, at least not as Disney typically portrays it. You see, according to the book, the mermaid's sister showed up at the edge of the boat and claimed that they had been given a magical knife from the sea witch that could prevent the mermaid from dying and turning into sea foam. Only, much like with the transformation potion, there was a dark twist. In order for the knife's magic to work, the mermaid would have to kill the one that she loved, which in this case was the prince, and after stabbing him in the heart, if she let his blood drip down from the knife and onto her feet, she would turn back into a mermaid. Now that's gruesome. According to Hans, though, the Little Mermaid loved the prince too much to kill him and instead decided to toss the knife into the ocean before jumping in herself. She knew that she was about to become sea foam, so the Little Mermaid prepared for the worst. However, the book explained that after a little while she realized that she hadn't turned into foam, but instead was transformed into the air around her. The book then explained that the fact that she chose to allow the love of her life to be happy rather than kill him for her own gain, the mermaid earned herself a soul. She then joined the Daughter of the Air in their travels around the world to spread happiness that the Little Mermaid herself was unable to obtain. What do you think about Hans Christian Andersen's version of The Little Mermaid? Did its positive ending make it worth all of the pain that was depicted, or is Disney's lighthearted film a better choice for the subject? Make sure you let us know in the comments below.